In the village of Kulu, nestled between vast savannas and dense forests, Temba lived with his mother, Zuri. The sun beat down mercilessly on the small huts of the village, and the dust from the earth seemed to seep into everything: the air, the clothes, the skin. For most of their lives, Temba and his mother had toiled in the fields of wealthy landowners who cared little for their workers. The work was hard, the pay was scarce, and the insults they received were frequent. Temba was a young man, strong and capable, with broad shoulders and calloused hands from years of labor. But despite his strength, he felt weak inside, crushed by the weight of his poverty. His mother, Zuri, was a wise and loving woman, and though she had tried to teach him the value of patience and hard work, Temba grew weary. "Life will get better," she would say, trying to comfort him when the insults became too much to bear. But Temba didn't want to hear it anymore. He dreamed of a different life, a life where he wouldn't have to beg for work, where he wouldn't have to watch his mother suffer under the harsh sun. Each day, he looked out over the fields they worked, wondering if there was something more beyond the endless cycle of labor. He had no father to guide him, and his mother's words of hope did little to ease the growing frustration inside him. One evening, as the sun set and the crickets began to sing, Temba sat outside their small home, his legs drawn up to his chest. Zuri sat beside him, gazing out at the horizon. "Temba," she said softly, her voice filled with concern, "you're not yourself these days. What weighs so heavily on your heart?" Temba didn't answer at first. He wanted to tell her how he felt, but he couldn't find the words. The truth was he was tired. Tired of being poor, tired of being humiliated, tired of living in the same cycle day after day. He finally turned to her, his eyes filled with a mixture of frustration and determination. "I can't keep living like this, Mama. I want to go somewhere else. Somewhere better." Zuri frowned, her gaze becoming distant as she thought about what he was saying. Temba had barely slept the night before his departure from Kulu. The anticipation had been gnawing at him all week, growing stronger by the hour. That morning, as the sun rose over the village, he knew in his heart that he could not put it off any longer. The decision to leave was made. His mother, Zuri, had noticed the shift in her son's demeanor. He had grown quieter in recent days, spending more time outside, staring into the distance as if searching for something just beyond the horizon. When Temba had first spoken of leaving, she had tried to discourage him. "You have to be careful, Temba," she warned. "The world outside Kulu is not kind to strangers." But Temba had already made up his mind. For years, he had worked without reward. He had watched his mother, a woman of great strength and wisdom, suffer under the unyielding sun, her body slowly breaking down from the weight of hard labor. He couldn't stand to watch it anymore. "Where will you go?" Zuri asked, her voice heavy with worry. Temba paused, looking at her with a mixture of sadness and resolve. "I'm going to Nkulu. I've heard the soil there is rich, and the villagers prosper. I believe that's where I can build a better life." Zuri frowned, concern knitting her brow. She had heard of Nkulu, a place where the villagers were said to be wealthy, where the crops grew tall and strong, and where the land was bountiful. But there was also talk of strange customs, rituals, and rules that outsiders were not always welcome to break. "What if they don't accept you?" she asked. "What if they're not like the stories you've heard?" Temba's heart fluttered with a mix of excitement and nervousness, but he held firm. "I'll make them accept me. I won't let anything stop me from having a chance at a better life. We've been struggling for too long, Mama. I can't stay here forever." Zuri's eyes softened, and for a moment she said nothing. She had always known her son was destined for something greater than a life of toil. But she also feared for him, feared that the world beyond Kulu was far more dangerous than he realized. "I only want the best for you, Temba," she said quietly. "But I can't stop you from making your own choices. Go then. Just be careful." Temba nodded, his heart heavy with the weight of his decision. He hugged his mother tightly, lingering for a moment, before pulling away and walking towards the road that would take him to Nkulu. His journey had just begun. As he walked away from the village, his heart pounded in his chest. He had no idea what awaited him in Nkulu, but he was determined to find out. The road ahead would be long, but it was his road. And this time, he would walk it alone, seeking the fortune that he believed was his to claim. These chapters set the stage for Temba's departure and the internal conflict that leads him to seek a new life. His desire for change and his determination will be key themes throughout the story. Let me know if you'd like me to or develop any specific plot. The journey from Kulu to Nkulu was long and full of uncertainty. Temba had heard whispers of how the path between the two villages was fraught with danger. The forests that lay between them were dense and uncharted, inhabited by wild animals and mysterious forces. The road was barely more than a trail worn into the earth by those who had passed before, and sometimes it disappeared entirely, leaving travelers to navigate by the stars. Temba had expected this. He had prepared for it mentally. What he hadn't expected, however, was the isolation, the silence that seemed to wrap itself around him like a thick blanket. For the first time in his life, he was truly alone, far away from his mother, his village, and everything familiar. The sounds of birds and insects had long since become a dull hum in the background as Temba walked alone through the wilderness. At night, he slept under the stars, using a blanket he had packed for the journey. The wind howled through the trees, and the forest seemed alive with unseen creatures, rustling leaves, snapping branches, and the occasional distant cry of an animal. He had heard stories from older men in Kulu about the spirits that roamed the land, but now that he was on the road, he found himself wondering if those stories were more than just warnings. Temba's food rations dwindled quickly, and there were long stretches where he went without a proper meal. But his hunger was nothing compared to the gnawing feeling in his chest. He could feel the weight of his decision, of leaving his mother behind, creeping up on him like the shadows that lengthened with the setting sun. At times, the thought of turning back crossed his mind, but he quickly silenced it. Turning back meant admitting failure, and Temba refused to do that. He encountered few people along the way, just the occasional wandering trader or traveler. Most were cautious about speaking to a stranger, as the land was not one to invite open conversation. But one evening, after a long day of walking, Temba met an old man sitting by a fire near the edge of the forest. The old man looked up as Temba approached. "You travel far, young one," he said, his voice raspy from age but firm with wisdom. His eyes twinkled under the dim light of the fire. "The road ahead is long, and the journey not for the faint of heart. What brings you to these parts?" Temba paused. He had heard of people who would try to deceive travelers with false promises or dangerous advice, but something about the old man's presence felt genuine. "I am going to Nkulu," Temba replied. "I seek a new life, a better life. I'm tired of the hardships of my village." The old man nodded slowly, as if he had heard this many times before. "Ah, Nkulu. A place of great prosperity, yes. But also a place with its own price to pay. Do you know the customs of the people there?" Temba hesitated. He had heard that Nkulu was a place of wealth and abundance, but he knew little about the deeper traditions that governed it. "I don't know much, but I've heard that the soil there is rich, and that the people live well." The old man's eyes narrowed, and he leaned closer to the fire. "The soil may be rich, but what you don't know is that the land itself is not so easily tamed. Nkulu has its own laws. It demands something from those who seek its bounty. Are you willing to pay that price?" Temba felt a chill run down his spine. "What price do you mean?" The old man did not answer immediately. Instead, he stared into the fire, lost in thought. Then he spoke, his voice quieter. "The people of Nkulu are prosperous because they honor their traditions, but they also guard their secrets. Beware, young man, for the road ahead is not just one of miles, but of choices. And sometimes those choices are darker than you might expect." Temba didn't know what to make of the old man's cryptic warning. Was it just the ramblings of an old traveler, or did it hold a deeper meaning? He decided not to dwell on it. He had already committed to his journey, and nothing would stop him now. The next morning, he thanked the old man for his advice and continued on his way. As he walked further, the landscape began to change. The dense forests gave way to open grasslands, and the air grew warmer. Temba felt a sense of anticipation building within him. Nkulu was close. He could feel it in the very air. By the time Temba reached the edge of Nkulu, the sun had begun its descent, casting a golden glow over the fields. The village was nestled in a wide, fertile valley, surrounded by hills and forests. It looked like something out of a dream. The fields stretched out before him, lush with crops, corn, cassava, and sweet potatoes, growing in abundance. The villagers moved about their work with a sense of purpose, their clothes clean, and their faces free of the weariness Temba had grown so accustomed to in Nkulu. As he stepped into the village, Temba could feel the difference immediately. There was a quiet sense of pride here, as though the land itself demanded respect. The houses were well built, with sturdy walls and thatched roofs. The people moved with ease, their faces bright with smiles, not the weary frowns he was used to seeing in Nkulu. Temba's excitement quickly turned to anxiety. He had come here seeking a better life, but now that he was on the doorstep of Nkulu, the reality of it all seemed daunting. The villagers eyed him curiously as he walked through the narrow paths between the houses. He wasn't sure if they were just strangers curious about an outsider, or if there was something more to their gaze. The first person to approach him was a young woman. She was tall and graceful, with dark eyes that seemed to look straight through him. Her name was Amara, and she spoke with a calm, steady voice. "You seem new here," she said, her tone polite but cautious. "What brings you to Nkulu?" Temba hesitated. He had been warned about the village's secrecy, but he couldn't hide the truth. "I've come from Nkulu," he said. "I've heard that the land here is rich, and I'm seeking a better life." Amara studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she nodded. "I see. Well, you're welcome here, but I must warn you. Nkulu is not a place for the faint of heart. There are customs that must be respected. Strangers are not easily accepted into our fold." Temba swallowed hard. He had expected some resistance, but the way Amara spoke made it clear that there was more to this village than he had imagined. "What do I need to do to be accepted?" he asked, his voice tight with uncertainty. Amara's eyes softened slightly, and she stepped closer, lowering her voice. "There is always a way for those who are willing to work hard and respect our ways. I can help you, but it is important that you do not tell anyone of your true origins. For now, you must be one of us, an insider, not an outsider." Temba was confused. He didn't know what Amara meant by this cryptic advice, but he nodded, deciding to trust her. "I'll do whatever it takes," he said, his voice firm. "I just need a chance." Amara smiled faintly, a knowing glint in her eyes. "Then follow me. I will show you where you can stay, and we'll begin your work. But remember, Nkulu is a place where the land tests you. And so will its people." As Temba followed her, a sense of both hope and dread filled his chest. He had made it this far, but the path ahead was still uncertain. Little did he know, the land of Nkulu had far darker tests awaiting him than he could ever imagine. Amara led Temba to a modest home on the outskirts of the village. It was a small, simple hut with walls made of palm branches, but it was far more comfortable than anything Temba had ever known in Nkulu. Inside, there was a small fire pit, some woven mats on the floor, and a handful of simple wooden furniture. It was cozy, a stark contrast to the harsh conditions of his former home. "This will be your home for now," Amara said, her voice soft and welcoming. "You can stay here while you find work in the village." Temba looked around, feeling a strange sense of relief. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he was starting over in a place that might actually offer him a future. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with gratitude. "I don't know how to repay you." Amara smiled slightly, her eyes studying him. "You don't need to repay me, Temba. But there are things you need to understand. Nkulu is a place of wealth and prosperity, but it has its own rules. People like you, strangers, are not always welcome. You must blend in, learn the customs, and show respect for the land and the people." Temba nodded, eager to learn whatever it took to fit in. But there was still a part of him that didn't fully trust the situation. What did Amara mean by blending in? What was the price for prosperity in Nkulu? Amara's expression became more serious. "There is something you must know, Temba," she said softly. "Nkulu has a history, a history that outsiders don't always understand. There are forces here that go beyond farming and trade, and some of those forces can be dangerous. Temba's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't sure if she was speaking metaphorically or if she meant something more sinister, but he was eager to know more. "Please," he urged, "tell me what I need to understand." Amara's eyes flickered with something that Temba couldn't quite place. A shadow, perhaps, or a weight of knowledge she wasn't yet ready to share. She glanced around, ensuring that no one was near, then lowered her voice to a whisper. "You've come to a place where the soil is rich." "Yes," she began, looking into Temba's eyes as if weighing his resolve. "But Nkulu's wealth is not just in the land. It's in the blood of its people." Temba blinked, unsure of what she meant. The words made his stomach tighten with unease. "What do you mean?" he asked cautiously. Amara sighed, and for a moment, she seemed to be wrestling with her own thoughts. "Our ancestors made a pact with the spirits of this land, Temba. They agreed to work the fields and honor the land in exchange for prosperity. But the price of that prosperity is hidden, and it's not something most outsiders would ever understand. Nkulu thrives because the spirits require something more than just the hard work of the people. It demands sacrifice." Temba's heart raced. "Sacrifice," he repeated, his voice hoarse. Amara nodded slowly. "Yes, the land of Nkulu is a living thing, and it demands its payment for everything it gives. The elders know the truth, but it is kept hidden from the younger generations. They don't want to scare you, but if you stay here, you will eventually see it." Temba's mind reeled as he tried to process what Amara was saying. This was more than just farming, more than just hard work and good fortune. There was something supernatural at play. He thought back to the old man he had met on the journey, the one who had warned him about the price of Nkulu. And now the words began to make sense. "Are you saying that in order to succeed here, we must sacrifice something?" Temba asked, the unease settling deep within him. Amara looked at him, her expression somber. "It's not something that's talked about openly, but yes. The land here is not without its cost. The elders offer their knowledge and services to the spirits, performing rituals to ensure the prosperity of Nkulu. They perform ceremonies that require blood, sometimes animal, sometimes more. But the land thrives in return. It's a trade, a covenant that cannot be broken." Temba's pulse quickened, and his breath caught in his throat. He didn't know if he was ready for this. He had left Kulu in search of a better life, but now he was faced with a terrifying reality. Could he and his mother survive here? Was the prosperity truly worth the price? What if he couldn't abide by the village's rules? What if the cost was too high? Amara seemed to read his thoughts. "I don't mean to scare you," she said, her tone softening. "But I want you to know the truth. There are things in this village that are better left unsaid until you are ready. If you choose to stay, you will be part of the agreement. The spirits do not care about your past. They only care about your willingness to respect the land and its laws. And if you break those laws," she trailed off, her eyes darkening. Temba felt a chill run through him. What kind of place was this? "Why are you telling me all this?" he asked, his voice low, almost to himself. Amara's expression softened, though there was still a certain wariness in her eyes. "Because I see something in you, Temba. I know you didn't come here for greed, but for a better life. And I don't want you to be caught unaware. You deserve to know what you're walking into." Temba nodded slowly, digesting her words. Despite the weight of the warning, there was something about Nkulu that drew him in. Perhaps it was the promise of a fresh start. Or maybe it was the hope that this strange, dangerous place could offer him something he couldn't get anywhere else. "I understand," he said quietly, still unsure of what he had truly understood. "Thank you for telling me." Amara smiled faintly. "Take your time, Temba. But remember, Nkulu's wealth isn't free. The land will give, but only if you are willing to give in return." As Temba sat alone in the small hut that night, the sounds of the village outside seemed muted, as if the air itself was holding its breath. The full weight of Amara's words pressed down on him. How far was he willing to go for this new life? Was he prepared to make the sacrifices that Nkulu demanded? The following morning, Temba woke to a different world. The sun was high, and the village was already buzzing with activity. The air was thick with the smell of cooking fires, and the sound of children laughing filled the streets. He could sense the prosperity in every corner. the wealth of the land making itself known in the well-kept homes, the abundance of food, and the busy marketplaces where traders exchanged goods. Temba had been offered work by several farmers, as Amara had promised. He was to help with the harvest, a task that he was accustomed to. However, it wasn't the work that held his attention, but the strange and unsettling undercurrent that seemed to linger just beneath the surface of the village. The people of Nkulu were friendly, but their friendliness had an edge to it, a caution that Temba couldn't shake. As he worked in the fields, he noticed that the villagers rarely spoke of their past or their traditions. They went about their work as though everything was normal, but there was an unspoken tension in the air. Even the children, who had once seemed carefree, now had an odd quietness about them. One evening, after a long day of harvesting, Temba returned to his small hut, exhausted but deep in thought. He couldn't get Amara's words out of his head. He needed to know more. The land of Nkulu was giving him what he had always dreamed of, but at what cost? As he sat on the mat in his hut, the door creaked open, and a familiar voice called out to him. Temba. It was Amara. Her face was drawn, and her eyes were wide with something that looked like concern. Come with me, she urged softly. There is something I need to show you. Temba followed her into the night, his heart pounding in his chest. Amara led him through the village, towards the far end, where the houses became sparse and the trees began to encroach. It was a part of Nkulu that Temba had never ventured to before. Amara paused at the base of a large tree, its branches twisted in unnatural shapes. This is the heart of Nkulu, she said softly. This is where the spirits reside. Temba looked around, unease creeping into his bones. The air here was different, still almost oppressive. The ground felt cold beneath his feet, despite the warmth of the night. The spirits of Nkulu have always protected this village, Amara continued. But they demand more than offerings. They need sacrifices. It's why the land flourishes and why we continue to prosper. The elders understand this, but we do not speak of it to outsiders. Temba's blood ran cold as he understood the weight of her words. The price of the prosperity was more than just ritual. It was a constant dark demand. Amara, Temba said slowly, his voice shaking with realization. What are you asking me to do? Amara met his gaze, her eyes hardening with resolve. I'm not asking you to do anything, Temba. I'm showing you the truth. Temba awoke the next morning, his mind clouded with uncertainty and confusion. The voice from the forest still lingered in his ears, echoing with an ancient warning that felt far too real. He had come to Nkulu for a new life, a prosperous future. Yet, with each passing day, the price of that prosperity seemed to grow steeper. He couldn't escape the feeling that his soul was slowly being drawn into a darkness he wasn't sure he could fight. As he walked to the fields, his thoughts kept drifting back to the ritual Amara had described. The sacrifice, the human blood. It all felt so far from the life he had imagined. Yet he could not deny the allure of the wealth and power that had already started to change his fortunes. He had built a new life in Nkulu, one that felt like a dream. But now, that dream was beginning to unravel before his eyes. By midday, Temba had decided to seek guidance from the one person in the village who might offer him the clarity he so desperately needed, the village elder, Baba Kato. Baba Kato was known for his wisdom, his deep understanding of the spirits, and his knowledge of the ancient ways that bound the land of Nkulu. Temba found Baba Kato sitting under the shade of an ancient baobab tree, his gnarled hands tracing the lines of a carved stone as he muttered to himself in a language Temba couldn't understand. The old man's eyes were closed, but there was a strange energy about him, as if he could sense Temba's presence even before he arrived. Baba Kato, Temba said cautiously, his voice trembling with uncertainty. I need to speak with you. The elder's eyes opened slowly, his gaze sharp despite his age. He studied Temba for a long moment before responding in a soft, yet commanding voice. You have come seeking answers, haven't you? Temba nodded, feeling a knot form in his stomach. Yes, Baba Kato. I've heard strange things. There are rituals here, sacrifices. I've been told that to truly succeed in Nkulu, one must offer something to the spirits. Blood, even. Baba Kato's expression remained unreadable as he gestured for Temba to sit beside him. Tell me, child, why have you come to Nkulu? Temba hesitated, then spoke from his heart. I came to escape the life I had in Mash Village. I wanted something better. I wanted to give my mother a life without hardship, without humiliation. But now I fear. that the price for that better life is more than I can afford. The elder listened intently, nodding slowly as Temba spoke. When he finished, Baba Kato let out a long, low breath. Nkulu has always demanded a price, Temba. But the question you must ask yourself is not what the land demands, but what you are willing to give. Temba's heart beat faster. I don't understand. What do you mean? Baba Kato's eyes locked onto his. The spirits of Nkulu are ancient and powerful. They are not merciful, nor are they cruel. They simply are. And if you seek to harvest their gifts, you must understand that those gifts come with a cost. A sacrifice. Temba shuddered at the word. But is it worth it? What does it truly mean to make such a sacrifice? The elder's face grew grave, his voice lower now, as if he were sharing a secret only the most trusted could hear. Sacrifice is not simply a ritual, child. It is a choice. When you give of yourself, you surrender a part of your soul. It is a trade. What you gain in wealth and power, you lose in something far more precious. The spirit world does not give without taking. The question you must ask is, what is it that you are willing to lose? Temba felt the weight of the elder's words sink in. His mind raced as he processed what Baba Kato had said. He had come to Nkulu seeking to escape poverty, to escape the suffering that had defined his life and his mother's life. But now he realized that this prosperity, this new life, might cost him more than he was willing to give. I don't know if I can make such a choice, Temba admitted, his voice barely a whisper. Baba Kato nodded slowly, his eyes filled with both sympathy and understanding. No one can tell you what to choose, Temba. The spirits do not force us to make sacrifices. They only show us the path. It is up to us to decide whether to walk it or turn away. But remember this, once you make the choice, there is no going back. Temba sat in silence, staring out at the village. The air felt heavier now, as though the spirits themselves were watching him, waiting for his decision. He could feel the weight of the land pressing down on him, and for the first time, he understood the true cost of the prosperity he had been offered. Baba Kato's voice broke through his thoughts. You must also remember that the spirits are not the only force at work in Nkulu. There are others here, those who have learned to manipulate the spirits, to bend them to their will. You must be careful, Temba. There are those who would deceive you, who would use you to achieve their own ends. Temba looked up at the elder, his heart racing. Amara, he said, his voice tight with suspicion. She's the one who brought me here. She says she wants to help me, but I don't trust her. Baba Kato's gaze hardened. Amara, he repeated, his voice low. She is not what she seems. She is a servant of the spirits, but she has her own ambitions. She seeks to control the power of Nkulu for herself. Beware, Temba. Trust her only as far as you can throw a stone. Temba's mind reeled. Amara, the woman who had offered him a way into the village's secrets, had her own hidden motives. And now, with Baba Kato's warning ringing in his ears, Temba knew he couldn't afford to trust anyone, not even those who seemed to offer help. Thank you, Baba Kato, Temba said quietly, standing up. I have much to think about. The elder nodded, his gaze softening for a moment. You are welcome, child. But remember, the path you choose will shape your future. Choose wisely. As Temba walked away, the weight of his decision pressed on him like never before. He had come to Nkulu to change his life, but now he realized that the changes he sought might not be the ones he expected. The spirits, Amara, Baba Kato, everyone had their own hidden agenda. In the end, only one thing was certain. Temba's future was in his hands. But whether it would be a future of prosperity or destruction, only time would tell. Will Temba stay true to his ambitions and push forward with his difficult quest, no matter the challenges or consequences that lie ahead? Or will he decide to return home to the comfort and safety of his mother's embrace, abandoning the pursuit of his dreams? Watch out for part 2. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you're enjoying this story and want to see what happens next.